Ladies and gentlemen, it is our pleasure to welcome our special guest, Mr. Joe Nick Patoski. He's a writer, historian, and Texan. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
I want to kind of start off. Where exactly are you from?
I was born in Pennsylvania. I pretty much grew up, spent all my life in Fort Worth, Texas. That's where I grew up. My family moved there when I was 2, and I went all the way through public schools there before I went off and wandered around.
What kind of music did you grow up listening to?
Growing up, I listened to a lot of, I guess my entry or gateway was Top 40 radio, which was much like throughout the South, was pretty diverse back in that day. So you heard a little bit of everything. You heard rock and roll, but you heard country and soul and rhythm and blues. So I was exposed to a lot of different music, but I pretty much liked it all.
Well, what about the music of Willie Nelson? Can you remember the first time you heard his music?
Oh, yeah. When I was a kid in Fort Worth, on Saturday night on Channel 11, which was the independent television station, they would show a lot of country music, syndicated programs, Ernest Tubbs Show, Porter Wagner, and Pretty Miss Norma Jean before Dolly, all that kind of syndicated shows. And starting it all off was the Cowtown Jamboree, which was a live program from Panther Hall, basically trying to sell whoever was playing Panther Hall that night, getting people to come out. And Willie was a regular, not just at Panther Hall, but on TV. For all practical purposes, viewers kind of took him as a local because he was playing Panther Hall, it seemed like, at least every other month. And it was a regular on his circuit. So he was in my radar then, and I guess through Top 40 Radio, Fair and Young and Hello Walls was a big hit. And we didn't think of it as country, we just thought of it as a big hit. So Willie was there and always in the background, but I don't think it was until 1970, and I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that I listened to, actually I take it back, it was like 72, I heard Yesterday's Wine, and where I'd known Willie as a country performer previous, this was kind of like, Yesterday's Wine was really his first thematic album, and it was really deep stuff, and it sure dug in when I heard it that first time. So early 60s, but all the way through the early 70s when I got to know Willie's music.
If you could put it into words, what is it about Willie Nelson that you like so much?
Willie's appeal to me personally is he does it all. He's a singer, he's a composer, and he's a guitarist. And as a singer, I love the way he phrases and he sings like a jazz singer, even though he's identified as a country musician. And these days, it seems like his singing is really pretty much talking blues. As a songwriter, I mean, you start with the 3 songs or 4 songs that really brought him to the national focus in the early 60s. Hello Walls, Crazy, Funny How Time Slips Away, and I guess Nightlife. So he did that. And to listen to him today when I watch him perform, I love hearing him play guitar because he's having to carry more of the load. He's a really expressive stylist, and I can hear a recording, and within 2 measures, I know it's Willie. He has a sound unlike anyone else. So there's all those 3 elements, and then you go beyond that and look at the entertainer, the performer, the icon that is Willie. He's up there with every other one-name icon. He is an equal, I believe, if not, but maybe time will tell us different to Elvis. He is a giant who walks among us.
I was hoping you could tell us about your book. The book is called Willie Nelson, An Epic Life. What gave you the inspiration to want to write the book?
Well, my inspiration for writing the book was kind of coming in at bass-ackwards. And I really had been thinking I had a Texas book in me about, Texas culture. And really it was through my agent, Jim Fitzgerald in New York, kind of reminded me what was right in front of my face. And he had actually said the best way to write a history is to write it through someone. That's the best way to tell a story. And he said, someone like Willie Nelson. And I just said, wait a minute, back up there. Because, my history as a writer, my first interview with him was in the fall of 1973. So he's just been a constant throughout my writing career, and he's been someone I've gone back to the well with every few years. So to me, it was really a natural that I can sit here now and say, you want to know the story of Texas since the Great Depression, look at Willie Nelson's life. That is the story of Texas. He has all the great qualities of what I think a Texan character is. And, it's independent, kind of contrarian, willing to go against the grain, willing to take risks, believing in yourself. He embodies all the positive characteristics of what makes Texans Texans. And we are different than anyone else.
You just mentioned the first interview that you did with him. Can you tell us your recollections of that time? Was that the first time you met him?
It was the first time I met him, yeah, and I'd heard his music. And in fact, I'd seen him somewhere around that time opening up a car lot, showing off their new Fords for the year. He was playing on the back of a flatbed truck, and when the band went on a jam, it pretty much blew my mind. So I knew he was different. And I remember I was watching him before I did my interview. I was watching him being interviewed by Chet Flippo, who I knew Chet's work, and he was writing for Rolling Stone and really kind of putting Austin music on the map as far as a music center through his writing. And Chet's interviewing him, and Willie's, he looks like a hippie in so many respects. He's got long hair, and he's got a kind of a sparkling stud in his one earlobe, and he looks totally Austin in that he's wearing a T-shirt and cut-off jeans and running shoes. But the one tip-off, and he had kind of a beard going, the one tip-off was he had a diamond horseshoe-shaped pinky ring. And, that's old-school country there. And I was really getting off on the contrast that, like a kid. Now, on the other hand, he had all the or evidence that he was a hardcore country music veteran. So really kind of had the best of both worlds at a perfect time, and really a great time to be in Austin.
What was he like when you met him? What was his demeanor? What do you remember from his personality?
I know now well enough to say he was very tolerant, not letting on when a young pup asked him stupid questions. He was very accommodating. He still has this talent that if you're sitting across from him, you're the only thing going on right in his life, whether that's true or not. And he's really focused and tolerant and attentive. He's not like a typical celebrity or personality when you get next to him. That getting next to him is kind of the big deal, but he's the same guy then that he is now. And I feel very relaxed around him. That's kind of, I noted it in the book, Merle Haggard, he's got a little bit of nervousness, whether it's because he did time, kind of deer in the headlights, scared rabbit kind of thing, but when he gets with Willie, he calms down like he never calms down. And he's got that kind of a presence that I know now that first interview he was being very, very accommodating and tolerant. And that's a special skill. Not everybody in show business has that.
Through the process of writing the book, you got to talk to a lot of people. What was the most surprising thing that you learned?
What was the most surprising thing I learned? Going back to his early years, was Willie had done his own autobiography, and he was helped by really one of the great Texans of literature, Bud Shrake. And that was done in like the late 80s. So I reread that, and I was trying to figure out what was left out. And it was really these years when he leaves home, when he leaves Abbott, little farming community north of Waco, and he drifts to Waco, he drifts to San Antonio, he drifts up to Fort Worth, and he drifts up to Portland, where his mom lives, in Portland, Oregon. And then he drifts back to Fort Worth, Houston, and before he makes it to Nashville. And he'd always kind of glazed over some of that. Maybe that's because to him that was less interesting, but because those seemed like missing elements, it was piecing that together. And I'll tell you one thing. I mean, just visualize Fort Worth, Texas, 1959. Really, the bad part of town, the stockyards, which is really rough and tumble, real hardcore cowboy area. And there in a bar is Willie Nelson and his collaborator at the time, Roger Miller, on fiddle. Willie's playing guitar, and they're getting really well lit, and probably playing in front of 5 people, and having the time of their lives. To learn about Roger Miller's encounters with him in Fort Worth before either of them got big. I like interviewing Hank Cochran, who's since passed, but he was the guy that gave Willie a break as a songwriter. I signed him to a publishing deal, $50 a week at Pamper Music. And right after Hank does this, and he gave up his own, getting an increase in his own salary to get this guy Nelson signed up because he thought he had chops. But he takes Willie back to where he's living. Okay, Willie had signed a publishing deal with Pamper Music. Hank Cochran signed him up after him at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge doing a song swap. So Hank gives up his salary, tells Willie he's going to sign him up. Willie's got it made, finally. He's got a job in Nashville. So Hank takes him back to where Willie's living, and it's this really beat-up, run-down trailer park. It's a drive up, Hank laughs. And Willie takes offense. He thinks he's being laughed at for being, dirt poor and all that. And what are you laughing at, man? And he said, I'm laughing at it because this is where I moved into when I moved into Nashville, and this is where Roger Miller lived when he moved in. That was the inspiration for the song King of the Road.
Wow, that's quite a story. This is probably also a difficult question. I know it's a difficult question for me. What would you say is your favorite Willie Nelson album?
My favorite album right now, and it always changes. I like the tribute album he did to Cindy Walker a few years ago. Just selected songs. And, his classics. Lately, I've been hearing a lot of Red-Headed Stranger, and that was really groundbreaking as far as making a career. And that album was the one that really kind of tipped everything and led to him being who he is today. And I like that album. I was up and driving around Colorado, Wyoming, and I was remembering that his wife Connie kind of told me the story. They were coming back from a ski trip in Steamboat Springs, and he said, I got an album I've got to deliver to the record company pretty soon. What am I going to do? And they kind of talked and sketched out the album on the drive home. And no one ever gave it its due. The record company thought it was a demo. They couldn't believe how little he had billed them because he made the album so cheap. Everything he went was wrong. This was going to be a failure, and it turned out to be the big success just by doing everything contrary.
What about your favorite song that he wrote?
Again, it depends when I'm thinking. I'd say right now, Nightlife, just because it's such a great piece of blues and jazz. And in fact, it wouldn't get released as a single by D Records out of Houston because they thought it was too bluesy and not country enough. That's who that cat is.
I got one more favorite question. He also is known for interpreting so many songs, like Blue Skies, for example, or Rainbow Connection. What about your favorite song of his that wasn't written by him, but he made his own?
I guess right now, and again, this always changes. City of New Orleans, Steve Goodman wrote it. Arlo Guthrie owned it, and Willie appropriated it. I'd probably give a close second, and it's only because it can never really be compared completely to Ray Charles, but Georgia on My Mind. He takes other people's music, and the way he does it is appropriation, but City of New Orleans is almost as good as On the Road Again as far as an anthem of American mobility. And when he sings Good Morning America, I Love You, How Are You, Don't You Know I'm Beyonce's Son, that's him. I don't know if Steve Goodman knew him back when he wrote it, but man, he nailed it.
Oh, yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that. I wanted to ask you about the late B. Spears. You had the opportunity to talk to him, and discussed in the book. Tell us about him. What were your memories of him?
Well, B was next to Sister Bobby and drummer Paul, the longest-serving member of the band. You know, he did take some time off in the 70s, played with Waylon, played with Guy Clark, but really the most powerful thing and the biggest testimony is that, you know, like I said, Willie sings all over the place. He sings behind the beat. He's a jazz singer. B hears that invisible rhythm in his head and plays it when no one else knows where this thing is going. He's the guy that knows. So he was the one that kept time. And there are a couple of stories that I got. One from Floyd Domino when Waylon's band backed up Willie and how lost they were because B wasn't there. And then how when Phil Lesh of the Grateful Dead sat in with the band and he didn't know where the heck this band was going. And B heard it when no one else did. And plus he was a fun guy and just funny, full of life, and he's that direct connection to Texas dance hall music because his daddy was in Easy Adams and the Texas Top Hands, real great swing band. And he grew up across Flora's General Store in Helotes, Texas, where there's still a sign that says, Willie Nelson tomorrow.
I also wanted to see if you could tell us about your favorite memory, just in general, no matter what, whether it was an interview that you did with Willie, a show that you saw, your favorite Willie Nelson memory.
Well, I'll tell you this, kind of, it's not that vivid or anything. That this is when the book was finished. I made sure most of the people that I interviewed got copies of it early on so they'd know what I was saying. And this is two. One is I got a call from Bill Mack. And Bill Mack was on Willie's place. He was a DJ, and Willie called in every Wednesday to Bill. They're old friends going back to the 60s. And Bill called me, and he said, did you hear? Willie and I were talking about your book today. I said, no, I wasn't listening. What did he say? He said, this is Bill says, is quoting Willie. Bill said, he said, there are things in there I'd have forgotten, and there's things in there I wished he would have forgotten. And when I heard that, I knew I did right because I know who Willie is enough, and he doesn't care what people are saying as long as they're talking about him. And he knew I'd do a good job. When I first ran into him once I started working on the book, I ran into him at the Saxon pub, and he's going to sit in with his daughter, Paula. This is in Austin, right before Christmas. And it's great. I'm sitting back in the booth with him and his ex-wife, Connie, and kids from 3 different marriages, and they're all hugging on one another. And I saw Willie, and I said, man, I've been obsessing about you for the last 6 months or so. He said, I know. He said, people keep calling and asking, is it okay to talk to you? And then he kind of beamed at me. He said, I'm sure glad you're the one doing this. And I couldn't ask for any better testimonial. He trusted me. He knew that I could do a fair job, and that's all I was trying to do. And I'm not trying to heap praise on him, and I'm not trying to, tear a hole in him either. But I can say this. He's now 78 years old, and I'm really happy to say this, that he's cool.
That's definitely true. And that has to be just an incredible honor for him to say that.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question kind of about your own personality. I feel this can reveal a lot about a person. What is your all-time favorite meal?
My all-time favorite meal? Well, I'm half Greek. And my mom made this really killer chicken with a tomato base and cinnamon and all this. It's really strange, but my wife figured out how to make it. She was taught by my mom, and that's my favorite meal. I guess, but that's personal. Beyond that, plate of barbecue, give me some brisket or ribs, give me some Mexican food, some enchiladas, a lot of hot sauce. I'm a happy camper.
What is the best thing about being Joe Nick Patoski?
That I get paid to do what I do. I keep waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and say, we're wise to you. You can't do this anymore. But they haven't yet, and I'm just having a blast. This is fun.
Well, what's on the horizons for you?
Well, my next book and it'll be out late this summer, is on the Dallas Cowboys. And it's an unauthorized history. And Willie Nelson is kind of one story of Texas. The Cowboys are another. And it really was motivated by people kept asking, well, who's next after Willie? And the fact of the matter is, there is not another Willie out there. There's no one that comes close, or no one that's as engaging, is all-encompassing. I've started this book with the simple premise: the only thing bigger in Texas than Willie Nelson are the Dallas Cowboys. And basically, by tracing their history, it's really the story of sports as culture and how sports defined the city, for better or for worse. I grew up in Fort Worth all my life. You know, you look at Dallas, it's like, what's the dang deal with Dallas? I think I've spent about 500 pages trying to figure that out.
Everybody can visit your website, and that's joenickp.com. My last question, for anyone who listens to this interview, what would you like to say to them?
I'd like to say it's great to connect this way. The power of radio continues to be fairly mind-blowing. And much as the world's changing, we still got to communicate with one another. And the more we do that and realize what similarities we share rather than the differences, that's enough to give me hope and keep me going. And one of the great ways to do all that is through music. And that's why I've written what I've written, and why I'll continue to write what I write. To me, that's one of the greatest things in the world, is what a way to communicate with one another.
Thank you so much for this interview. Thank you for the great book. I can say that I have enjoyed it.
Well, I appreciate it. And I'm not done. I've got more music stories in me. I'm trying to figure out what the next one's going to be, but there will be more. There's more stories to tell.
Very good. All right. Well, you have a good one, and thanks again.
I'll do my best, and see y'all next year.
All right. God bless.